Over the course of its runtime, Zenless Zone Zero has gone from my most favorite gacha to a game that I dreaded booting up until the point that I dropped it. And nearly a year later, ZZZ has had win after win, with everything building up to what I consider to be a top tier 2-year anniversary patch. All this has landed the game in the general good graces of the gacha community and back into my daily routine for the past 5 months. I'm Forte, and let's walk through the rise of ZZZ and why you might want to check it out if you aren't playing it right now. Now to start, I have to give credit where it's due and acknowledge that while ZZZ does have its problems, its style and core gameplay have never been the issue. Zenless Zone Zero falls under the urban fantasy umbrella and it wears the genre on its sleeves. Most of New Eridu is presented to players in slices with newer areas opening up to larger and more diverse settings. Personally, I find the towns and spots in ZZZ to be extremely endearing. There is a lot of variety from space to space, but they all share a certain quality to them that I just can't help but find charming. During all of my time that I've spent playing Zenless, I've even developed a special connection to some of the places, like 6th Street, the home of the siblings, which has become one of my most favorite locations in gaming. It's a small slice of New Eridu that feels oddly quaint and retro, and it's tucked away in an environment that feels decidedly more cyberpunk, yet it still has this air of liveliness to it. And for me, it invokes a strange sense of nostalgia even, reminding me of the simpler times with my own siblings. I pretty much knew for a fact that the setting had left an impression on me when one day I was just randomly playing the 6th Street background music in my head while I was putting gas in my car. Well, that's just how well put together a lot of the locations in ZZZ are, and I suspect that my experience is not a unique one amongst the fans. All that said, the world of ZZZ is dripping with a cyberpunk meets modern style, and the characters aren't lacking in that area either. Zenless features a large cast of cool and lovable characters with a notable variety in character types, from a panda bear with cookware to little gremlin children. There's definitely a character for everyone. One thing that's really important to me that Zenless does is that it has a decent roster of guide characters, although they are consistently snubbed in some way, usually by having their banners next to more anticipated banners. Hoyo does release them at least, and it's semi-regularly, which is more than I can say for some gacha games. Cough cough seeds again. Don't get me wrong, the girl's a bit amazing and I'm a Jane fan to the death of me. But I was a young boy that watched anime. And you would be a liar if you said that at some point you didn't think Sasuke was that guy. And sometimes I just want to play the brooding cool dude. I mean, Zenless doesn't exactly have that, but we have Billy and Haramasa and that's enough for me. And as for gameplay, it's genuinely top notch, and if you catch me, gun to my head and ask, what's the best combat in gacha? I'm gonna say, brother, you could have just subscribed to my channel to find out. And once I make it to the pearly gates, I'll let everyone know that the combat system in Zenless Zone Zero is cracking top 3 with no issue, and a strong case for number 1. At its core, it's flashy and cool, but surprisingly technical for anyone who wants to dive a bit deeper, providing players with room to grow mechanically. This results in a system that raises the ceiling for team comps in a way that typical gachas don't allow for. In other words, ZZZ allows you to get good, and doesn't hold you back as much as other gachas would. And I really appreciate this because it's let me get away with not having to pull for several patches and just brute forcing my way through with older units, and including some teams with A-rank characters. Personally, I respect devs that respect me, and I am much more likely to spend on a game that doesn't feel like it's constantly waiting for a chance to rob me. Unfortunately though, that was not always the case with ZZZ, and the game didn't make it to where it is now without some notable bumps in the road. As with anything, first impressions mean everything, and many gachas will live or die based on their opening moments of the game and how it lands with the audience. Despite how high production ZZZ seems to be in terms of presentation, one aspect of the game had one of the worst initial receptions of a gacha game I've seen in recent years, and that's all due to its unique take on exploration, the TV mode. And what that is a grid-based board that the players would be dropped onto and are able to move around on space by space. All the stories and event missions would take place on these boards, with certain spots triggering 3D maps where the combat would play out. There would even be special events that would occur on the board itself, such as chases, puzzles, or fighting, quote unquote. So, hot take, I didn't really mind the idea of the TV mode. I even enjoyed some of the implementations of it, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority there. When Zenless first came out, most people were blown away by the look and feel of the game, but the TV mode was immediately causing new players to bounce off of the game. During the 1.2 patch, the devs have started to completely phase out TV mode, and the remnants of what's left from the earlier launch content had so much quality of life updates added to it that it goes by much quicker now, or it can be just skipped altogether. The damage had already been done for earlier players, but with the devs gracefully admitting that the mode was ill-received and course correcting, there's still a real chance that people who left due to the TV mode come back to a pleasant surprise. And of course, new players are far less likely to immediately encounter the same kind of friction and stick around longer to become hooked players. Due to Hoyo's quick response and pivot from the biggest criticism at the time, Zenless was able to more or less cruise off of being a solidly made gacha game. Also, many players really appreciated having a more responsive dev team at the helm, and from patches 1.2 to 1.4, the game was able to enjoy about 3 months free from any real drama. Obviously, that didn't last. As I've mentioned on other videos, ZZZ's 1.4 patch marked the release of the first Void Hunter, who are basically super powerful agents in the lore, and their gameplay reflects that power. So we got our first real must pull for ZZZ with Hoshimi Miyabi, though real fans know Jane came first. And she proceeded to bulldoze her way through the game. And on top of the release of that little monster, one of my lovely commenters reminded me that this was also when they changed the way that ults worked in the game. And for those of you who are not in the know, your team of 3 used to have to share an ult gauge, and you'd have to decide who you wanted to use the ult. After 1.4, each agent got their own resources for building ults, and you could use an ult on one agent without taking the food out of the mouth of another. In hindsight, this was a ridiculously stacked patch that might have benefited from not being as loaded as it was, because what followed was the dreaded trend that threatens most gacha games: HP inflation. Now, I've talked at length on this concept in my last video, so I'll keep it brief here. Prior to the 1.4 patch, the HP inflation in Zenless Zone Zero was almost non-existent for gacha standards from July 2024 to January 2025. However, there is a very visible point where the devs had to have noticed that they had a problem on their hand, and I can show you. Looking at this graph, you can see that from launch to January, the upwards trend was minimal, and we even see a huge dip here. And honestly, if it had kept up with this kind of incline, we'd have a completely different story on our hands. But like I said, there is a point here where Miyabi and the individual ults were introduced. Now let's look at the other half of this chart. Right here we have 1.4, which dropped towards the end of December 2024. And surely the devs started to realize the problem they had unleashed somewhere in this area. What do? The players aren't even trying anymore. They're just pressing keys and slapping their phones, and Miyabi's doing their dishes and filing their taxes and just playing the game for them. And we gave them 3 ults. 3! At this rate, they're never gonna pull again. We're cooked. What do? Aha. Simple. We raised the numbers. And as you can see here, that's exactly what they did with this sharp incline in the trend, and players hated it. It didn't take long for people to start feeling the increased health that the bosses were receiving, and it didn't take much to put 2 and 2 together. Miyabi and the ult changes had moved the game into a new era, and it's sad to say that this was a phase that many people began to feel burned and burnt out. Many people who didn't get to pull Miyabi started to feel like they didn't have much incentive to keep playing if the HP kept rising, and many began to question the point of even pulling any character that wasn't a Void Hunter. These concerns, coupled with the inflated HP, caused players to just cut their losses and drop the game because it started to look like they were going to be strong-armed into frequently pulling on banners just to keep up. Even for me, someone who pulled M2 Miyabi, the fun that I had playing my Miyabi team versus any other team had become way too hard to ignore, and I eventually quit myself. I mean, I do take some of the blame for pulling Miyabi dupes, but as a Jane enthusiast and an Ellen sympathizer, it did hurt my heart a bit to see the queens take such a hit. It even got so bad to the point that the devs began trying to make the game as anti-Miyabi as possible without straight up replacing her weapon with a weak old baguette. Although I'm not even sure how much that would have done. Even to this day, with other Void Hunter level characters being released, the devs are still finding small ways to snub Miyabi specifically. Luckily, I can also say that ZZZ has recovered from the Hoshimi era fairly well. Though I can't personally speak on every point of contention during the 2.0 patches, the state of the gameplay in the 3.0 patches has been nothing less than amazing. Hoyo has begun revisiting old characters and powering them up, and it seems like the inflation issue itself has leveled out a bit, with the average inflation rate being roughly 7%, which isn't terrible all things considered. Additionally, it seems like the devs' approach to the in-game content has changed quite a bit while I was away as well, because there's a much bigger emphasis on reading, the gacha player's biggest weakness. By having a better understanding of character kits, team composition, and the boss mechanics, players are able to skip more banners and still clear content. This also allows for a degree of flexibility that I think is great. Experimenting and seeing what I can get away with when clearing stages is a lot of fun, and it opens up a potential to free up certain agents for other teams, and I haven't enjoyed building team comps this much since my epic 7 days. Now, all of what I've spoken on so far has painted the picture of a game that had a relatively strong start but eventually slid into a period of questionable design choices that ended up ultimately frustrating players and holding the game back. Though to its credit, being a Hoyo game, ZZZ is never not gonna crack a few million in monthly sales, and as far as I know, the game is still considered successful. However, even with the game making millions, it had still fell out of the upper echelons of gacha games, a space where its sister games Genshin and Star Rail solidly hold their positions. And with that fall from grace, a ceiling had begun to form for ZZ, and it seemed like it would just have to settle for being an option for people who made it past the filters of Wuwa, Genshin, and even Uma Musume. And with most people only having enough time for one gacha or two, being too far down on the list of gachas to play could make it really hard to climb once a game has settled in one spot. Luckily, the picture I painted also tells the story of a game that started its rise after the fall, and patch after patch, the devs have included quality of life changes, shifted mechanical focus in gameplay and character kits to smoothen out the HP inflation and power creep, and generally made the game more player friendly. I also want to note that during all this goodwill gaining, they released Pyrois, a character that's gained through the story and is one of the most powerful agents in the game right now. And all of this culminates to a highly anticipated second anniversary patch, which is not only the most generous I've seen from a Hoyo game, but more generous than I've seen in most gachas, period. With the usual currency being given out alongside several S-rank selectors, an updated standard agent pool, and in the following patch, a special selector banner with guaranteed pools with top tier agents on it. We also got another Void Hunter in this patch, but honestly, I've been more blown away with everything else, and by the looks of it, all the hard work by the devs is starting to gain a lot of traction amongst the gacha community. As it stands, ZZZ is finding its way back into the conversation, and I'm predicting that the game will see a jump in its rankings within the bigger gacha games that it'll manage to hold. That's assuming the devs continue to build upon everything that they've created, because there's people like me who are going to come back to the game again and really appreciate just how far the game has come. But like many of you know, nothing is forever, and the game is always one bad patch away from ruining all that goodwill. So whether they ride out this wave until Zenless hits its end of service, or they piss us all off next week, I'll be here to cover it all. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gacha related video essays, and if there's a particular aspect of ZZZ that you love, comment below, let's talk about it. But until then, this has been Baby Forte, and I'm out.